Lucy Moss directed Ratatouille, the TikTok musical. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Lucy, it's really exciting to have you with us. The musical has such incredible origins, with dozens or hundreds of TikTok creators writing songs for, a theoretical, hypothetical Ratatouille musical that came to fruition. So I'm wondering, in your direction, how did you try to honor the roots of the project? Because in the visuals, there are a lot of gestures to TikTok and really trying to capture the spirit of the original material.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the sort of guiding ideal of what I was kind of trying to do as a director was just that, was to kind of honor both the origins but also the aspirations of the creators. Because what was so interesting about the sort of TikTok phenomenon was that this musical that these thousands of people were imagining was very like traditional, very like live stage, like Broadway, the capital B musical. Like it was sort of like kick lines and like all this, sort of Alan Menken-esque, like I want songs, all that kind of stuff. It was all very like theatrical, but also obviously all done via this very contemporary medium. So I suppose my sort of like the main kind of like thought process that I had was being like, okay, so how do we take this material like completely seriously as a theatrical endeavor whilst also like celebrating the kind of like not celebrating like embracing the kind of chaotic like comedy, almost like ironic-y tone of TikTok. So that was kind of like sort of an overall like mantra for the process. But I think in terms of like in the minutia, like a lot of the formatting of the scenes and stuff was kind of like a take on the duet form of TikTok, where kind of people will be, people like do duets with themselves or with someone else, but they kind of like, I think it's like at Blake Herouse or whatever, who wrote the Rat's Life and the Kitchen Tango. His original video of like a Rat's Life is him like singing in duet to himself. So we kind of like took formats like that, things like the clone filter that we could basically use the kind of TikTok technology for our dancers to recreate kind of like Broadway kick lines and stuff. So it was kind of all about bringing this fusion of the sort of traditional musical theatre Broadway thing with its kind of TikTok-y flavor, and making sure that it's still like, was still in the same tone and vibe of where it came from, but whilst also like realizing it with, like the biggest Broadway stars in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's so remarkable is it does feel like you're saying like a traditional Disney musical that we all grew up on. But yeah, it's also in this new medium. It was written for the screen or designed for the screen because obviously, theaters are closed right now. So I'm wondering, like, how much inspiration did you draw from the original film when you were looking at, okay, how do I want to maybe compose some of this? And were you a fan of the Ratatouille film before, coming across the TikTok phenomenon?
Yeah, so I was obviously a fan. I feel like everyone's a fan of Ratatouille. It's not like, I'm not like ever since I was 4, it's been my favorite film. I've always loved it and enjoyed it. And actually, in terms of the staging of it, I had, by a weird coincidence, rewatched Ratatouille, the film, quite recently, before the process itself. But I was quite, because our book writers and the rest of the team was so like all over like the kind of like the beats from the film or whatever, and also because I was quite familiar with it, I really tried to steer clear of like really getting into the film, except for sort of like recreate like iconic moments in like theatrical ways. So like, for example, the kind of like the puppeteering is obviously a really big like physical moment that if it was on stage would be this like giant like choreography sequence. And we tried to kind of like make sure that we were, really like honoring what people are expecting, but also kind of doing this like theatrical version. But yeah, it was really about like trying to make it not, like just like a reading of the film, but like everyone having their own like nods and interpretation, nods to the film whilst also having their own interpretations. And in terms of the staging, yeah, I really tried to make it like sort of feel like a virtual representation of what you might have seen in a Broadway theatre. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the project came together, from what I understand, incredibly fast. Like you maybe had a month between when it was greenlit to, going live on January 1st of this year. How did you navigate that incredibly frenetic pace? And what were some of the challenges of trying to direct, a cast and ensemble? What I imagine is all remotely. I don't know if you were actually in the room with anybody.
No, no, I navigated it with difficulty. I did not sleep for the month of December. Like, I actually don't think I've ever worked harder on anything in my entire life. Like, it felt like, it reminded me of being at university and the day before you have a dissertation due that you're like really behind on and you're just working constantly. It was like that, but for a whole month rather than just the day before the deadline. Um, it was, yeah, and I was in the UK, so I was actually here in my flat in London, and everybody else was, well, not everybody else, there were some people in Germany, people in LA, people all over, but mostly different time zones, and mostly I was sort of, what was quite nice actually was because I would wake up 5 hours before everyone else, I could get loads of work done before they all woke up. But basically, whereas usually as a theatrical director, it's so much about like fostering the company vibe, like the environment, the relationships, people, like working on the text really in real detail. For me, it was much more about the like macro. It was about, so I basically, I did like Zoom rehearsals with each actor, but a lot of that was I'd essentially pre-prepared this very detailed shot list of like, okay, so because they're all filming themselves in their own homes, being like, okay, so for this scene, these 2 pages, you're going to hold your front-facing camera at portrait, you're going to have, your head and shoulders in the frame, and we'd have like a style guide of all this, creating all this information. And then it'd be like, and you're going to look to your right when you're talking to Remy, and look to your left when you're talking to Emil, and you're like gonna wear this and do whatever. It was basically a lot of like detail went into the like pre-planning of it in a way that I wouldn't ever be that prescriptive usually. But then it was like the rehearsal process was kind of just like demystifying that and helping people understand what they were expected to do, and sort of basically being like, it's all fine, it looks really scary and complicated, but actually once you're like, oh, okay, so I put my headphone in here, I listen to the music, I face there, oh great, now I can do my thing. And then it was about like, briefly and basically depend on people's schedules and availabilities and receptiveness, sort of, talking about the tone of the show, how we wanted it to be sort of irreverent, but taking the material really seriously, and sort of like getting everyone to sort of understand the like the fact that it's sort of like lovingly pastiching and sometimes occasionally parodying like the musical theatre world, whilst also being like deeply respectful of it. And like we'd sort of talk in that way, but then it was very much like over to them to really bring what they wanted to the characters. And people like Wayne Brady, who like went above and beyond with the makeup and the costume. It was just like ideal. It was so awesome. But yeah, I can't take credit for that, their incredible performances. Really, it was very much leaving it to the pros to kind of bring themselves to the roles.
Yeah, and speaking of, I mean, an incredible cast assembled for this special. Titus Burgess as Remy, Andrew Barth Feldman as Linguini, and then some like theater legends like Andre de Shields in as Ego. I mean, just an incredible ensemble. Could you talk a bit about working with them? I mean, I imagine if you're working one-on-one, like, are you on a Zoom with Andre de Shield, like giving him direction? That's incredible.
It was so terrifying, and he was the most wonderful man, and I could not respect him anymore. Like he just, yeah. So some of them it was sort of like we'd like Zoom, so like with like Andrew, we like chatted beforehand, and then he went off and did his stuff, and then checked in with me about it, and blah blah blah. But like with Titus and with Andre, they were both in a studio, so it was like everyone in New York except for me Zoom. And yeah, just being like, okay, cool, this is the vibe, this is what the character's doing. And then he just, well, both of them just, I didn't have to work very hard to get them to bring their incredible performances, but it was just like a dream come true. Like me and Eleanor, the choreographer on Andre's filming, when he just like, he would keep, every time he did a few takes and he would do this like amazing like rolled R, he'd be like Ratatouille, and me and Eleanor would be like screaming at how iconic it was. Like he's just so iconic, and he was just so generous and wonderful. I was very starstruck with both of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just a bit of a fan, basically from afar. That's what my role was, to be like, oh my gosh, I love you, I'm obsessed with you. That was great.
I can imagine. And actually, speaking of Andre, one of my favorite moments is when you do the flashback to Ego's childhood. It came out so well, and I know it's a nod to the original film, but that's one of my favorite moments of the special. Are there any moments that you're like particularly fond of or proud of when you look back on it? Like, yeah, you know what? Despite all the kind of limitations, this moment came out incredibly well.
I feel like that about a lot of the triptych scenes. So the idea behind the triptych scene, a lot of it had been inspired by the book writers Michael and Patrick had basically just done this virtual show before called Circle Jerk, which just got nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Then I was like, oh my God, how iconic. Yeah, so they'd done a lot of stuff in like triptych, which had really inspired that format for me and the video designer, David. But like trying to get 3 different people to like respond and say all their like I honestly have to hold my hands up and say like I basically was like trying to be really ambitious, and then it's sort of like gone too far by the time I realized I probably shouldn't have been that ambitious. But David managed to work some magic, and we did a lot of like, okay, scenes in the headphone, like Patrick, one of the writers, would like have like read in all the other lines and they'd be like responding to it and like looking at places. So I think like those moments where they're, you know, it seems like they're kind of responding to each other in the room, or it doesn't feel super artificial, I think is really awesome. But I think I have to say I mean, I love it all. It's all fantastic. I love all the songs, but a real standout moment for me is I Knew I Smelled a Rat, where Mary Testa just does this absolutely unhinged and wonderful performance as Skinner. And then it's like the Eleanor's choreography and the like clone tree. It just felt like a real like realization of the idea of it being kind of like TikToky and crazy, but also really theatrical and just like, yeah. So I think that's a highlight for me.
Yeah, I have to imagine capturing the choreography for on this medium was incredibly tricky. So, but you do it so well in so many of the different numbers with, you know, trying to kind of capture the movement and the scope of what you might see on a Broadway stage. Could you talk a bit about just trying to like wrap your head around how do I capture the excitement of like a dance break or a tap number on, you know, an iPhone camera?
Yeah, well, I mean, most of that is a huge testament to Eleanor, the choreographer, who's just a dream and an angel, and just like we just had so much fun working together, even though we were like only ever met over Zoom. But I just like was obsessed with her and just like her energy and vibe. And also, she's obviously a very like accomplished TikTok maker herself and content creator there, and she's got, you know, millions of followers, and she's very famous and wonderful. So she really understood the medium of how to kind of like bring out the best via the kind of phones and stuff. But I think actually, like for me, the moments of visual interest was sort of one of the first things that clicked, because I was like, how, you know, when you're like, okay, how do you try and create a sort of like live Broadway feel, but with the restrictions of a pandemic, but that's like had its origins in TikTok, and like TikTok filters are so advanced and cool, and like the clone filter of like basically making a kick line, I was like, of course, like that was sort of a no-brainer in some senses. So it was just really fun to be able to like experiment with that. But the thing that was most difficult was obviously like the time of being able to like edit it all together, and like, you know, still give like an impression of what the choreo would be. But yeah, I think all of that credit has to go to Eleanor, because she is just awesome.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the musical sensation 6, which you've co-written and co-directed, and you're also the youngest female director on Broadway when it was in previews. A remarkable accomplishment. You know, can you just take us behind the scenes of that surreal moment where, you know, for people who don't know about 6, it was slated to open probably minutes before Broadway shut down in March of 2020. So can you just talk about like that experience, but also the excitement and thrill of opening up again, because 6 is coming back. I think it starts previews in October, which is thrilling. So what does that feel like to know you're going to be back on stage?
Yeah, it's so exciting. I mean, my heart goes out to our US company so much. We've been very fortunate here to have, I think the show is currently running in the West End and on the UK tour. Touch wood that continues as it is. But yeah, we've had a bit more opportunity to like stop and start here, but they've been just waiting so patiently to have that Broadway opening that they all deserve so much. And we worked so hard on it back in early 2020, and I'm just really excited to just bring everyone back together, for us all to just be like doing what we love in the theatre, and then for like the world to see the amazing work that they have been doing and will continue to do.
Yeah, and also nice to see a lot of your cast as rat queens in Ratatouille too. That was a nice touch for people with keen eyes.
Yeah, I pulled in a favor on that one in a big way.
Lucy Moss, congratulations on Ratatouille, the TikTok musical, and thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Thank you so much.